This is my Losi Micro-T desert truck. I've had it for about a week now. You can see this is sitting on a jump. I made a couple of jumps for it just to, I guess, have a little bit of fun with it. These are just made from a little bit of medium density fiberboard for the top, just 2 or 3 mm for the top, and a bit of pine for the ramp, and then fine tuned the height. They're probably inch or inch and a half high. They're probably a little bit high still. But what became apparent when I made these jumps was that the rear suspension on the micro trucks is really light and very springy, and what was happening is that the truck was bottoming out every time it came off the jump. What that was doing to the bottom of the truck, you can see I've got a bit of tape over here trying to protect it, but it was bottoming out on the suspension here and bearing over these heads of the screws, as well as starting to scratch the plastic, and eventually would thin out the plastic and start to do some damage. So what I've done, I've actually made a couple of modifications to the suspension to make it a little bit stiffer and try and avoid some of this problems that we've got with bottoming out. So I'll show you what I've done. As you can see, the rear shockers look a little bit different. I'll just zoom in a bit so you can get a better look. Whoops. The rear shockers or rear suspension looks a little bit different. What we've got is at the top here, this is a piece of silicone from some heavy gauge silicone wire, probably about 12 gauge wire, maybe 10 gauge silicone wire, and pulled the conductors out of the centre and cut out just a cylinder and compressed it, used it to compress the springs a little bit. And what that's done effectively is tighten up the rear end of the micro truck so that it just takes a little bit more load before it starts to compress. That addressed one of the problems, which was that the back suspension was too soft. The other problem was that the suspension very easily bottomed out and made contact with the road when it was coming off of the jumps. So what I also did was got another piece of silicone from maybe some 14 gauge or 16 gauge silicone wire, and again pulled the conductors out and cut out a little donut and put it at the bottom of the shaft. So you have to actually disassemble the shockers, which there are plenty of examples on YouTube showing you how to do that, and just put a very thin piece of silicone at the bottom which acts as a bump stop, which reduces the I guess the hard hit as the suspension bottoms out, but also just reduce the travel a little bit so that it didn't make contact with the road or the pavement quite so easily. That's actually made quite a difference. It actually works quite well. It still makes contact when I go over the jumps fast, just because of the amount of energy involved. But for just normal goosing around and driving it around over the jumps, it seems to work a whole lot better. They're also, on the control arm, there are 2 screw positions for the shock absorber. You can actually move it to the second position, and what that does is effectively limit the suspension travel or index it up a little bit so that it holds the chassis up off the road or the bitumen that it's driving on when it compresses. But I guess one of the problems there is that what that will effectively do is then transmit the loads back up through the other parts of the suspension and maybe damage that, which was one of my concerns. Hence I've put the pieces of silicone in. The next experiment that I'll try is actually use the second location and just see if I can stop it making contact. It's still just making a little bit of contact. The other modification that I've made to my desert truck is the connection. So I've changed over, I'm not sure if you can see here, changed over to the Dean's micro plugs. These are far superior to the Losi connectors. They're able to comfortably handle 12 amps, which is way more than this would ever generate. But what that means is that there are no losses in the connectors anywhere through the vehicle. Another customisation that I've made is actually a charge port. So I've put a charge port underneath here that's easy to access. What this means is when I need to charge my truck, rather than having to take off the cover every time, all I simply do is roll it over, and I have the other half of the Dean's connector and just connect it in, and that charges the battery without having to take the cover off every time. The other modifications that I'm intending to do to the desert truck, I have an atomic dual BB ball bearing motor coming with front and rear ball bearings, and also some lipo cells. So I'm going to put together a lipo pack for it, and the dual ball bearing motor. Everything that I've read says that the standard Losi motor has some trouble dealing with the extra voltage from the lipo pack. So hopefully with the atomic motor we shouldn't have any problems. My motivation for going with lipos isn't speed. I think this little truck's probably fast enough as it is, but just run time. So the run time is improving every time I cycle the truck, but it'd be nice to be able to drive it around for 20 minutes rather than 10 minutes between charges. So that's my motivation for the lipo pack, and I guess I'll just be modulating the throttle a bit more. Anyway, that's my micro truck for now. When we've got some daylight, hopefully I can get some videos of it going over the jumps to show you how it rides with the suspension modifications, and a little bit further down the track when the new motor and lipo pack are installed, I'll give you another video then.